A number of people have come to me with the question of how do I pray in tongues so that I may solve problems in my life? So basically, these were people who are trusting God by praying in tongues to get certain breakthroughs in their lives. And what I wanted to tell them was that praying in tongues to solve problems is very complex. But then I thought to myself and said, if I say that, they will probably just be more confused than even how they were before. So in most cases, I just gave them a very simple explanation. But the truth of the matter is that praying in tongues to solve problems is very complex. And in this video, I would want to explain in detail what actually makes it very complex. And it is important for you to understand this because I used to see many people who would like pray in tongues and they would not get breakthroughs, and they would start questioning why they're not getting breakthroughs. Some of them would even get discouraged to pray in tongues. But you see, if you understand, if you understand the complexity of praying in tongues to solve problems, then it will be easy for you to align yourself when you're praying in tongues actually to solve problems, and you will find it very, very easy to get breakthroughs anytime you pray for them. So the first thing that you need to understand when it comes to praying in tongues to solve problems is understanding problems themselves. Now, the way we perceive problems from the earthly perspective is not the same way heaven perceives problems. So basically what we call problems in heaven, they don't exist. And this is the reason why anytime you are praying and anytime you are in the presence of God, you can't mention your problems. Basically, the Holy Spirit never mentions your problems to God because your problems don't exist in heaven. They only exist on earth. So that's something you need to know. So usually when you are praying in tongues, what the Holy Spirit is doing, he is not mentioning your problems to God. Basically, he is just doing something that is more complex. I'll explain it later. You will understand how it actually works. But now I want you to get the heaven's view of problems, because usually the solution is coming from heaven. So they solve it according to their perspective. They don't solve according to our perspective of problems. So that's why it is important to get heaven's perspective of problems. Now, let me take you back to where everything began, in the Garden of Eden. When God was creating, he created heaven and earth. That is what Genesis chapter 1 tells us. Now, after creating heaven and earth, both of them were perfect. And then God decided that he would make man and put man to be in charge of earth. And then God himself will be in charge of heaven. But then what happened was that man corrupted the earth, but heaven remained uncorrupted. And remember, the devil wanted to corrupt heaven also, but he was kicked out. But then when he was thrown on earth, he came and caused man to corrupt the earth. And so what happened is that because the earth was corrupted, problems came into existence because of that corruption. But you see, in heaven, there was no corruption. So basically, problems don't exist in heaven because heaven is still perfect, just as God made it perfect in the beginning. Now, when you understand that problems only exist on earth and don't exist in heaven, it should help you align yourself with the heavenly terms, with the heavenly frequencies, with the heavenly perspective, and forsake the earthly perspective. Now, what happens is that the problems that exist on this earth, they are not living earth. They are what? They are earthly problems. As long as the earth exists, they are going to be there. This is why before you were born, there were problems on this earth. After you are born, there are still problems on this earth. And after you die and live, you will still live the same exact problems on this earth. And this has been mentioned very many times in the Bible. From like the book of Ecclesiastes chapter 1, where the teacher is talking about how repetitive the things of this world are. So basically things like rivers flowing into the sea, but the sea is never full. And then he keeps like repeating and mentioning how these things are repetitive. Actually, he says more than what man can say. And also, you can remember in the case of Jesus, during that time when he was being anointed with very expensive oil. And then Judas suggested that why was this oil not sold and that money given to the poor? And you remember at that time, the reply of Jesus was that the poor, you will always have them. So poverty is one of the problems that faces this earth. And as you can tell from the words of Jesus, he knew that what? Poverty was always going to be there. That was Jesus himself, the one who solves all the problems of the world. The Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world was the one like speaking, saying, the poor you will always have them. Now, this is something I want you now to understand. You are not going to solve problems of this earth, because the problems of this earth, they belong to this earth. You can't take them away. They belong here. You can't solve them. They belong here. They came as a result of the corruption that began during that time of the fall of Adam and Eve, and they exist to this day. And now the solution that Christ brought was that he will take us out of this earth because of like to take us away from these problems. That is what Christ actually like came, like that is the solution that Jesus provided. That's why there is the hope of going to heaven to be with Christ, the mansions that he was going to prepare for us. Now, that is the first thing that you need to understand. Now, the second thing you need to understand is about how praying in tongues actually works when it comes to solving problems. Now, when you are praying in tongues, what those tongues are actually doing, or what the Holy Spirit is interceding for you while you are praying and you are in trouble, is actually raising you to a higher spiritual level. And you may ask yourself, how does that solve my problem? And I'll give you 3 good examples from the Bible, because these are the 3 ways that God actually solves, quote unquote, solves problems. The first one, it comes from the story of Noah and the flood. You see, at that time, God was frustrated by the sin of the world. And so he decided to bring a flood. And that flood that came was a problem to the inhabitants of the earth. A huge problem, because it had come to wipe them out. But you see, God provided a solution for that problem. And what was the solution? Building an ark. So basically, he instructed Noah to build an ark. And what happened to that ark? It was that as the waters rose, the ark also floated on, it floated on that water. And so it also rose with that, with the rising of the flood. So basically, the flood did not affect the ark and those who were in the ark. But then those people who are not in the ark, they drowned in the waters of that flood. So that is the first solution, that how God and the Holy Spirit helps you solve your problems when you pray in tongues. So basically, he will just lift you up as more troubles come. He continues just to lift you up so that those problems never affect you. The second one comes from the story of Moses. Now, from the story of Moses, at that time when he was before the Red Sea, you see, he had a big problem because behind him, the Egyptians were coming. And in front of him was the Red Sea, and they could not cross that Red Sea. But then what happened was that he prayed to God and sought the face of the Lord. And the Lord instructed him to do what? To stretch his rod over the Red Sea. And by stretching that rod over the Red Sea, what happened was that the waters parted. And now there was dry land that they could walk across. So basically, that's the second way that God sorts problems for you. So basically, if there is a huge problem that you don't know where to go, basically what will happen is that God will part that problem so that he creates a way in between that problem, or in that situation where you don't know which way to go, he will actually just create a path in there. And then the third one is the case of Jesus. During that time when he was he was crossing the Sea of Galilee. So basically, what happened was that his disciples left before him, and he was not in the boat. He went to pray. And then, after his disciples had left, Jesus wanted to follow them to the other side, but the boat was gone. So, what happened? He decided to walk on water. Now, that is the third way that, like, God will sort your issues, because he will cause you to actually just walk on top of your problems and they will not affect you. Now, praying in tongues is like that ark of Noah. Basically, that enables you float above problems. So there are problems that you need to float over. Then there are also problems that you need to find a way, like get a path, because these problems are blocking your path. So in that case, praying in tongues will be like the rod that Moses said that he stretched over the Red Sea, and God parted it. Basically, God created a way in that problem. And then lastly, like it will be like the what? The hand of Jesus, the power of Jesus that God gave him, and he was able to actually walk on top of the waters. Now, the last thing that you now need to understand, because I have told you how, like how heaven perceives problems, and I've also told you how praying in tongues actually like solves the problems. Now, the last thing you need to understand is that the problems are not going to be sorted out. Like the solution is a continuous solution. And this is what I mean. When you pray in tongues, you'll be raised to a particular level in the spirit. When you pray in tongues, God will part the waters for you. But you see, what happens is that after some time, you have to sustain that level of prayer that got you to that spiritual level for you to avoid sinking back. Because if you don't pray and sustain that level of prayer that got you to that level, what will happen is that what? You'll start falling back and you'll fall back into your problems. And this is why you usually see some people, they pray for certain issues in their lives. God sorts them out, but after some time, the same problems recur. Not because God has forgotten them, but because these people, when they prayed, they rose to a spiritual level where they were not experiencing those problems again. But what happened? They began doubting and they stopped praying. And so they began going back into their problems. More like what happened to Peter when Jesus was walking on water. You see, Peter stepped out and then he began walking. He was walking fine, just like Jesus. He was walking on his problems. But what happened was that he stopped believing in Jesus. And so he began sinking, and it had to take the hand of Jesus to actually save him from that sinking. So that is what happens. So the tongues that you speak and the level that they get you to sustain that level, you have to maintain that intensity of prayers that you are doing before. And I have a personal experience. In my life, to this point, the best experience I have had, I still remember it very clearly. It was a time when I had just come from a fast. So this was a 5-day fast. And during that time, I was praying in tongues a lot. And what happened was that after that fast, because that fast was from Monday to Friday. And then on Saturday, I took a rest. Then on Sunday, I went to church. Then it just happened that on that Sunday also, there was a lot of like heavenly presence in the church I was attending. And at that time, people were praying and they were worshiping, and there was just a lot going on, and you could tell. And then in the midst of that, I had an experience. So with this experience, I found myself standing at a heavenly place. And this heavenly place had so much light. And I felt so good and so perfect. Like everything within just felt so perfect. I can't explain it in words, but it just was so perfect. And now you see, that experience was so good, but it only lasted for 3 seconds. It was very short and very brief. But the amount of joy and peace and perfection I felt in that moment, I have never felt it again in my life anywhere. And so what I understood was that, you see, for me to get to that point where everything felt perfect, I had what? Toiled a lot in prayer throughout that entire week to that point. And now you see, if I wanted to sustain that kind of feeling, I had to sustain the amount of prayer and the amount of purity and the amount of like dedication I had put in to actually get to that moment. But because I didn't, then of course I came back to a lower level where now there are some problems, not many problems, but there are some problems and there are some imperfections. So basically, that is how things work. If you want to experience like a certain level of peace, then you have to pray in tongues to a certain level of intensity. So basically, that's how those things work. So if you have any questions about it, or if there is something that you have not understood, of course, you can always ask, and I'll do my best to answer you and explain further. So that's it for today. God bless you.